One of my favorite tools in Illustrator is the Distort and Transform tool. And that's because it works really procedurally. It's something that you can use to create a grid, a dynamic set of patterns, and generate some very large, complicated imagery quickly using this one simple panel. So for example, if I have one red circle and I wanted to duplicate the circle, I've got a number of ways of doing that, right? I can hold down Alt and drag it over, Alt or Option and drag it over. I can select those again, drag it over, select all these again, hold down Alt or Option and drag them over, right? So I can create a line of objects this way. However, if I come down here and I'm going to change this to a blue circle, let's switch to my fill, change to a blue circle. If I have my object selected and I go to Effect, Distort and Transform, this is going to open up the Transform Effect window. And I want to make sure that Preview is checked, otherwise I'm not going to be able to see what I do. And you'll see a bunch of options in here. And what they allow you to do is create a series of copies. So if I say, let's make 10 copies, and say I want to move them to the right horizontally, I can add in some horizontal change moving this way. So I'm moving them to the right, and let's do solid numbers. So let's do like 50 pixels. I can slide this out of the way, and it's creating 50 pixels going ahead this way. And if I say OK, notice that now these are all going to move when I move this one circle. And any change I make there, they're going to be reflected in this line of circles. And that's because they are all duplicated effects of this one circle. This is kind of interesting because if I even add in an anchor point to here, and I press A to go to my direct selection tool and I edit these, now all the rest of them are going to be reflected and have that change. What you could also do, and I'm doing Control Z to get back, is go to Effect, Distort and Transform, and let's make 10 copies again. And if I have them move over to the right 50 pixels, I can also change their scale so that they get bigger over time, and I'm going to keep these the same. So I'm going to type in 110 and 110, and I press Tab or click out to go to the next ones. And here you can see that they're getting bigger as they go along. Let's make these a little bit closer together. I could also have them go smaller. So let's do a 50% change over time. You can see that they sort of change pretty rapidly. So you can combine these together as well. Now, if I wanted to make something like a grid, I could go in and say, let's do 50. Let's change this to 100, 100. So these are back at regular scale. Move these over by 50 pixels and then say OK. And then I can take the same exact one that I had and go to Effect, Distort and Transform again. And instead of moving them over horizontal, I can say move these down by 50 pixels, make 10 copies. And now I've made a grid really quickly. So it's taken this whole, all of these 10 and duplicated them down this way. And they're all still controlled from this one shape. And any change I make, they're going to be reflected out there. So that works in an interesting way. And if you want to expand it out so you can actually change some of these other shapes, go to Object and Expand Appearance. And now each of those objects, they're inside a group. So if we look at these, layer 1, you'll see my red ellipse is there, and you'll see this group of ellipses all together. So I would need to click on them, right click, and ungroup. Now when I click back, you'll see it has that original group of those 10, right click and ungroup, and then I can select this one and change it to a different color. Now, this is something that could work really well for creating a an 8-bit sort of pattern if you want to repeat squares. But there's even more you can do here that I think is kind of fun. I'm going to take all these, press delete. So for example, if I have a circle and I'm going to change it to have no fill and a black stroke, let's switch those out. So I just have a circle. Let's start a little bit smaller like this. And I go to Effect, Distort and Transform, Transform. I'm going to move this down a little bit. Oop, let's go back to 0. Let's move these down and let's do 20 copies. I'm going to put these kind of close to each other. So now I've got this idea of something cylindrical. And if I expand these out, let's do like 100, 110 by 110. Now they're all going out like this. And I can even, let's change how these are all sort of moving. And let's actually just do 105 by 105. There we go. And we're going to move them down like that. So this is only moving down 4 pixels at a time. They're increasing in their scale from 100% to 105%. And I say, okay, what's kind of neat is then if I go in and I add some distortion to the circle or add in some other elements, I'm going to add in another element on this path. And I move it down. These are all going to change along with it. So I'm selecting that anchor point, moving it down, stretch it out, move this one a little bit. You can start to get these really interesting forms going in together. And then what happens if you double that over itself? You get some really cool moments. This also works with lines. So if I have a single line and I go to Window, if I go to Effect, Distort and Transform, Transform, and I duplicate this down, 20 copies. I'm going to reduce this down to 95, 95. You can also rotate these around. So if you said I only want them to rotate by, if I made 12 copies and I had them rotate at 45, we'll start to get them to go in a circle. You can also choose the rotation point around what you want here. So if you want to rotate along the edge, this edge, you can do that. You can also choose random, so it does something a little bit more random. So there's a lot you can do with this to get some interesting sort of effects, but I do really like this mode of sort of adding in a couple of random points like that. So now you've got this sort of bent area that, doing this by hand would take, a good bit of work, but now you've got something more than you would have before. You can do a lot with it.